My name is Emily Hayes. I'm 28, a project analyst in Chicago. And if you asked anyone to describe me in one word, they'd say resilient. But resilience is born out of fire, and the fire that shaped me started with my own brother. He was supposed to be my protector, my ally. Instead, he spat the words that burned into me like acid. "You're worth nothing." He said it on the day of my graduation, in front of family, friends, and even professors. My knees shook, my chest burned, and humiliation spread across me like wildfire. And seconds later, when the dean paused, cleared his throat and announced something none of them saw coming, my brother's smirk collapsed. His arrogance crumbled, and every person in that auditorium turned to look at me, because what he didn't know was that my worth had already been recognized by someone much higher than him, the CEO himself. Yes, the CEO. If you're watching, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Has family ever cut you down in public when you least expected it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'll be reading them tonight with a glass of wine. That moment, my brother's words and the CEO's handshake, changed the entire direction of my life. But if you really want to understand how I got there, you have to know where I came from. Growing up, my family wasn't cruel in obvious ways. We weren't the type of household that screamed across dinner tables or broke dishes against walls. No, our brand of cruelty was quieter, sharper. It hid behind backhanded compliments and subtle comparisons that carved at me slowly, day by day. My parents always held my older brother, Mark, as the golden child. He was the athlete, the smooth talker, the one who could walk into a room and charm every adult into believing he was destined for greatness. And me? I was the quiet one, the observer, the girl who filled notebooks with plans and designs instead of chasing medals or applause. Mark's the leader, Dad would say at family gatherings, clapping him on the back. Emily's, well, she's dependable. Dependable, a word that sounded safe but not sparkling, a word that meant invisible, and over time, invisibility became my cloak. Until the day it ripped right off me most brutally. Every milestone of my life had been overshadowed by Mark. His high school graduation? He gave a speech that had the audience roaring with laughter. Mine? I quietly collected my diploma while half the crowd scrolled their phones. When he got into business school, Mom baked a cake with "Our future CEO" in bold frosting. When did I get into a state university with a scholarship? They nodded, said, "Good job," and went back to discussing his next move. And I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need the spotlight, that my time would come in my own way. But Mark never let me forget that in his eyes, I wasn't enough. "You're book smart, Emily," he'd say, smirking. "But book smarts don't make leaders. You'll probably end up behind a desk, working for someone like me." And everyone would laugh. Like it was just a harmless joke. But it wasn't a joke to me. It was a prophecy I was desperate to prove wrong. When graduation finally arrived, I thought, just for once, it would be about me. My gown felt heavy with pride. I'd worked 2 jobs while studying, pulled sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, and somehow managed to graduate near the top of my class. The auditorium buzzed with families holding flowers, balloons, and cameras. Mine sat in the middle rows, Mom, Dad, Mark with his ever-present smirk. I scanned the room, searching for some flicker of pride on their faces. Just a smile, a nod, anything. But when I locked eyes with Mark, he leaned over to Mom, loud enough for the people around us to hear, and said, "Why are we even here? She's worth nothing. She'll never matter." Laughter bubbled up from him, harsh and cruel. A few heads turned toward me, pity etched on their faces. My stomach lurched. My ears rang. In that instant, the years of being overshadowed, dismissed, diminished, all of it slammed into me at once. I wanted to disappear. To crawl under my chair and never resurface. But then, as if the universe had decided to throw me a lifeline, the dean of the university stepped up to the podium. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, smiled directly at me, and in front of the entire auditorium, he unfolded an envelope, His voice echoed through the hall. This year, one graduate has been selected for a very special honor, an opportunity extended by the CEO himself. Gasps rippled. Mark stopped laughing. Mom sat up straighter. Dad froze. And me? My breath caught, my pulse pounding so hard I thought the stage might shake with it. The dean's eyes stayed locked on mine. Emily Hayes. I swear. Time split in that second. On one side, years of being invisible, erased, belittled. On the other hand, everything is about to change, because when the CEO himself stepped forward, extended his hand and said, "Congratulations, Emily. We've been watching your work." The ground shifted beneath my brother's arrogance, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow, I was the storm. But if you think that handshake was the end of the story, you're wrong. It was only the beginning, because the more I rose, the more desperate my brother became to drag me back down. And what he did next? It nearly destroyed everything. Growing up in Chicago, my family wasn't the kind that broke apart in obvious ways. From the outside, we looked normal, stable, maybe even enviable. Dad ran a mid-sized auto repair shop, steady work, grease under his fingernails, pride in every invoice. Mom taught elementary school, always juggling lesson plans and parent meetings. They raised us in a 2-story brick house on the west side, with a fenced yard, a maple tree we used to climb, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. It should have been a safe place. But it wasn't, not for me. From the moment he was born, my older brother Mark carried the title of Golden Child. He was loud, charismatic, impossible to ignore. Teachers adored him. Coaches praised him. Neighbors called him the Hayes boy who's going places. Meanwhile, I was the quieter one. I loved books more than people, sketches more than sports. I found magic in spreadsheets before I even knew what a spreadsheet was. Organizing, planning, bringing order to chaos. But in a house where charisma was currency, my quiet didn't count. At birthday dinners, Dad would toast Mark's natural leadership. At family reunions, relatives would swarm him with questions about his future, while I sat in the corner, nibbling on potato salad, trying not to fade completely from sight. "Don't take it personally," Mom would whisper, squeezing my shoulder. "He just shines brighter in a crowd." But what she didn't realize was how those words stuck. Shines brighter. As if brightness were a zero-sum game, and there wasn't enough left for me. The favoritism wasn't just in words. It was in action. When Mark got his first car, a used Jeep Dad restored for him, they celebrated with cake, neighbors coming by to admire it. When I got mine, a 10-year-old Honda with a faulty air conditioner, Dad tossed me the keys with a shrug, saying, "It'll get you where you need to go." When Mark made the basketball team, Mom took a week off work to attend every game. When did I win first place in a regional science fair? She forgot to show up. She said she was busy grading papers. I learned early. My achievements were small background noise compared to Mark's spotlight, and Mark knew it. He weaponized it. "You're just ordinary, Emily," he'd say, smirking as he flexed in the mirror. Not that it's a bad thing. The world needs secretaries, too. Or don't stress about grades. Nobody remembers GPA. They remember charisma. And you don't have it. Sometimes he'd lean closer, voice dropping so only I could hear, "You'll always be less. And less isn't worth much." He never had to raise his voice. His confidence was poison enough, and every time my parents laughed it off as sibling banter. "Don't be so sensitive, Emily," Dad would chuckle. "Your brother's just teasing." But it wasn't teasing to me. It was truth dressed as a joke, reinforced day after day until it carved scars into me. Holidays became theater plays where favoritism was the script. On Christmas Eve, we'd gather in the living room, tree lights blinking, cocoa steaming in mugs. Dad would pass out gifts, saving Mark's for last. Big, expensive, dramatic. Mine were practical. A sweater. A planner. Socks. "Emily likes useful things," Mom would explain, and I'd smile politely, holding back the sting. Thanksgiving dinners were worse. Relatives circling like reporters, asking Mark about his latest internship or sports win, while I cleared plates in the background. One year, Aunt Linda asked me, "So, what are you up to, Emily?" Before I could answer, Mark cut in, "She's making spreadsheets for fun." Thrilling, right? Everyone laughed. I swallowed the lump in my throat and laughed too, pretending it didn't kill me inside. By the time high school ended, I had mastered the art of invisibility. But inside, something simmered. Every cruel joke, every overlooked achievement, every smirk that told me I was nothing, it all piled into a weight I carried. And quietly, I promised myself something. I would leave. I would build a life outside their shadows. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew I wouldn't stay the family's forgotten child forever. Still, even as I whispered those promises to myself, Mark's voice echoed louder. "You'll never be more than average, and average isn't worth remembering." At the time, I thought those words were just cruelty, but looking back, they were more than that. They were foreshadowing, because years later, standing on that graduation stage, I would hear them again. Not whispered this time, spat like venom, loud enough for the whole auditorium to hear. And that was the moment everything cracked open. By the time I entered college, I thought I had finally slipped free of Mark's shadow. I'd earned a scholarship, moved to a dorm 2 hours away, and threw myself into business analytics, a field he didn't touch. For the first time, I felt like I had space to breathe. But shadows have long arms. And Mark wasn't about to let me forget who he thought I was. He called often, too often for someone who claimed to be busy climbing ladders. At first, I thought maybe he cared. "How's campus life, little sis?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with false warmth. I'd light up, talking about my classes, the professor who saw potential in me, the project I'd just aced, but the warmth always vanished when I got to the good parts. "Analytics?" He'd scoff. "So basically, you're learning how to be Excel's secretary. Congrats." Or, "Top of your class? Cute, but grades don't make leaders. Networking does, and you? You couldn't charm your way out of a paper bag?" He laughed each time like it was harmless. But I could feel it, the undercurrent of jealousy. Because while he was still drifting through jobs and internships, I was thriving, quietly, consistently. When I came home for the holidays, the tension was sharper. Dad still bragged about Mark's connections. Mom still insisted I was the dependable one. But Mark? He'd poke at me, needling until my composure cracked. At one Thanksgiving, he raised his glass with a smirk. "Here's to Emily. May she always find joy in being average." The table erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, nails digging into my palm under the tablecloth. After dinner, as I washed dishes, he leaned in close, whispering, "You'll never outgrow being the background character, Em. Accept it," I whispered back. "One day you'll choke on your own arrogance." He laughed. "You don't have it in you." But what he didn't see was the way my hands shook. Not from fear, but from holding back a fire I wasn't ready to unleash yet. It was during my junior year that his mask slipped further. I'd just landed an internship at a respected consulting firm. It was small, unpaid at first, but it was something. I told my parents over dinner, excitement bubbling in my chest. Dad nodded. "Good job, Em." Mom smiled faintly. "Proud of you. But Mark?" He laughed. "Consulting? So basically coffee runs and data entry. Don't get too excited." When I didn't react, his smirk faltered. For once, my silence seemed to sting him. That night, I overheard him in the kitchen with Mom. His voice was low but sharp. "She's not special. Don't build her up. It'll just embarrass her when she fails." Mom sighed. "Mark, don't be so harsh." "I'm being realistic," he snapped. "She's not cut out for success." I tiptoed back to my room, heart pounding. Because in that moment I realized it wasn't just dismissal anymore. It was envy. The first time I caught him truly rattled was at a gala hosted by the firm I interned with. By some twist of fate, he was there too, tagging along with one of his so-called connections. I spotted him across the room, drink in hand, confidence painted across his face. But when he saw me chatting with a senior manager, someone who actually valued my insights, his smile cracked. Afterwards, he cornered me near the coat check. "What are you playing at?" he hissed. I blinked. "Excuse me? You think you belong here, with them?" "You're fooling yourself." I stood my ground. "I'm not fooling anyone. They invited me." His jaw tightened. He leaned closer, voice dripping venom. "You'll never be more than my shadow. Don't forget it." He walked away, leaving me shaking. Not from fear, but from clarity, because it was becoming obvious. My rise wasn't just inconvenient to him. It was threatening. Months later, when my senior year approached, I found something that confirmed my suspicion. An email, meant for a professor, had been mysteriously flagged as plagiarized. The accusation was false. I knew it. My professor knew it. And when I dug deeper, I found out who'd sent the anonymous tip. Mark, the brother who once swore he'd protect me, had tried to destroy my reputation before it could even bloom. Graduation day. The morning sun washed the campus lawn in gold, banners snapping in the spring breeze. My cap sat perfectly on my head, my gown freshly pressed. For the first time in years, I felt light, free. My name was on the program. My work had been recognized. I was walking across that stage today, and for once, my parents had come to see me. Not just Mark, but even as I straightened my tassel, I caught him watching me. His arms folded, a smirk playing at his lips, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. The arena filled with families, cameras flashing, cheers erupting with every name. My classmates glowed as they shook hands, diplomas in hand, dreams unfolding. When they called my row to stand, my heart pounded with anticipation. This was my moment. But then it happened. As I approached the stage, I heard it. Mark's voice, sharp, cutting, impossible to miss in the quiet between names. "You're worth nothing." He spat, gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. My stomach lurched. My feet faltered on the steps. My parents froze. Mom's eyes wide. Dad's jaw tight, but neither said a word. I felt every eye in the arena sear into me, like I'd been branded with shame. On stage, the dean extended his hand, but my mind buzzed. Ears ringing with Mark's words. "Worth nothing," it echoed, wrapping around me like chains. Somewhere in the crowd, Mark laughed under his breath, satisfied. He'd chosen his moment well. In the one place where I was supposed to shine, he dragged me back into his shadow. I forced a smile, shook the dean's hand, and accepted the scroll. Cameras flashed, but my heart felt heavy. When I walked back to my seat, whispers followed me. Students leaned toward each other, murmuring. Parents glanced at me with pity. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms spread like he'd just scored the winning point. After the ceremony, graduates mingled with their families, laughter and joy filling the air, but not mine. When I approached my parents, Mark was already there, spinning his narrative. "She tries so hard," he told them with mock sympathy. "But some people just don't have it. Better she learns that now than later." Dad didn't correct him. Mom didn't defend me, they just nodded, eyes darting away when I looked at them. It was like his words had poisoned even them. I swallowed hard, fighting tears. This was supposed to be the best day of my life. Instead, I felt invisible again, trapped under his thumb. And then, the announcement. The dean tapped the microphone, the crowd falling quiet. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," he said, "I have the honor of sharing one final recognition." I looked up, confused. He smiled directly at me. This year, one student demonstrated not only academic excellence but resilience, leadership, and innovation that caught the attention of industry leaders. The audience shifted, murmuring. The dean's voice rang clear. "Please join me in congratulating Emily Carter, recipient of the President's Award for Excellence." Applause erupted, thundering through the hall. Gasps, cheers, whistles. Cameras turned. Students clapped. Professors stood, and then the words that silenced everything else. "She has also been offered a position at Apex Global Consulting," personally extended by the CEO. My chest heaved, the weight of humiliation colliding with the shock of recognition. The world blurred, half shame, half triumph. Mark's smirk vanished. His jaw slackened. My parents stared like they'd never seen me before. I stood frozen, torn between rage, vindication, and disbelief. Because seconds after my own brother called me worthless, the world handed me proof he was wrong. But what would I do with it? The applause was still ringing in my ears when the ceremony ended. But it didn't feel like it belonged to me. People shook my hand, professors congratulated me, and strangers took photos like I was someone worth celebrating. But inside, I felt hollow, because when I looked past the cameras, I saw them. Mark stood stiff, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes burning with fury. My parents didn't clap. They didn't smile. They just looked uncomfortable, like my success was an inconvenience, and it broke something in me. In the parking lot, families hugged their graduates, balloons bobbing in the air, laughter echoing. I walked toward our car, clutching the award certificate like it was proof I wasn't invisible. But Mark couldn't resist. "Well," he said coolly, "looks like pity prizes are still a thing." I froze. My breath hitched. "Mark," Mom hissed under her breath. "Not here." But he smirked, leaning closer. "You think one award makes you special? It doesn't erase years of being second best." Dad didn't say a word. The lump in my throat tightened until I thought I might choke. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to make them see me. Instead, I whispered, voice shaking, "Why do you hate me so much?" Mark's smile widened. "Because you keep trying to matter." And just like that, I shattered. That night, while other graduates celebrated, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, gown still draped over the chair. The award sat on the table, glowing under the lamplight, but it didn't feel like mine. Tears streamed down my face, soaking the cheap wine I poured into a chipped glass. Every word Mark had spat replayed in my head like a cruel chorus. Worth nothing. Pity prize. Second best. I pressed my palms over my ears, but it didn't stop. The world had cheered for me. A CEO had offered me a future. But my own family, the people who should have been proud, had stood silent while my brother tore me down. And the silence hurt worse than the words. I curled up on the couch, whispering into the dark, maybe he's right. Maybe I don't matter. 2 days passed. I ignored calls, skipped meals, stared at the ceiling while the city buzzed outside my window. Then, on the third night, my phone buzzed with a message. Not from Mark, not from my parents, from Professor Davis, the mentor who'd nominated me for the award. Her text was short. "Proud of you, Emily. Don't let small minds shrink your vision. They only attack what threatens them." I stared at the words, the tears rising again. But this time, they weren't just from pain. Attack what threatens them. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. Mark didn't despise me because I was worthless. He despised me because I had the one thing he couldn't control, potential. And my parents? Their silence wasn't proof that I was small. It was proof that they were too weak to stand up to him. For the first time, my grief shifted, hardened. I sat up, wiped my face, and whispered, "I won't stay broken." I stood, walked to the table, and placed my hand over the certificate. Mark wanted me erased. My parents wanted me to be quiet, but I was done being both, because if my brother thought calling me worthless would bury me, then he had no idea what was coming next. I didn't tell anyone my plan. Not yet. For the world, I was just another graduate sending thank you emails, updating my resume, and starting the long grind of job hunting. But underneath, I was building something sharper, because revenge isn't about screaming in someone's face. It's about silence, strategy, patience, and my brother had no idea I was learning how to play his game. The first thing I did was simple: listen. Mark bragged constantly. He loved an audience, whether it was at the dinner table, in front of colleagues, or online. His LinkedIn posts were practically confessionals. Every deal, every networking event, every new client was flaunted like a trophy. I started collecting, Screenshots, dates, photos. Who he was meeting, who he was working with, who he claimed to be advising. Because if Mark had one weakness, it wasn't his arrogance. It was his need to be seen. I didn't have money, power, or a family name like he did, but I had people. Professor Davis was my first ally. I asked her cautiously about internships at Mark's firm, not because I wanted one, but because I wanted to understand his world. She smiled knowingly. "You don't want to join him," she said softly. "You want to learn how to outsmart him." I didn't deny it. She connected me to alumni who had crossed paths with Mark's company. Some admired him, but others, "Not so much. He cuts corners," one told me. "Acts like he's untouchable." But the paperwork tells a different story. Paperwork. That word stuck. On the outside, I played the part of the grateful little sister. When my parents invited me over for Sunday dinner, I smiled, nodded, ate in silence. When Mark bragged about his upcoming promotion, I even forced a laugh, because people reveal the most when they think you've given up. And Mark? He was careless when he thought I wasn't paying attention. That night, while clearing plates, I overheard him on the phone in the next room. "No, don't put that in writing," he snapped. "Cash is better." Paper trails get messy, my stomach twisted. There it was, the crack. I wasn't reckless. I didn't storm in waving accusations. Instead, I leaned on Eric, an old classmate turned IT consultant. He owed me a favor from years ago, and when I explained what I needed, he just raised an eyebrow. "You want me to dig around your brother's digital footprint?" he asked. I whispered, "Not everything. Just enough." 2 weeks later, he slid a flash drive across the table at a coffee shop. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. Inside were financial inconsistencies, emails, transaction notes, and time-stamped activity that didn't match the pristine image Mark painted online. It wasn't proof of a crime. Not yet, but it was a start. The CEO who shook my hand at graduation? He'd mentioned a leadership program, an opportunity for graduates to present projects that solved real-world business problems. I applied immediately. Not with a standard project. My proposal was called The Cost of Cutting Corners: Integrity as the Core of Leadership. It wasn't just research. It was a case study, and my case study had a subject. Mark didn't know it yet, but I was building the stage where his arrogance would expose itself. The acceptance email came late one night. My project was selected, and the final presentation? It would be delivered in front of the company board, executives, and yes, my brother. I stared at the glowing screen, pulse racing. Mark thought calling me worthless would end me, but I was about to prove, in front of everyone he wanted to impress, that his empire was built on lies, and the trap was set. The first small win came faster than I expected. The leadership program paired me with a mentor from the executive board, a woman named Caroline Wu, sharp, calm, the kind of leader who didn't waste words. She asked me why I chose my project. I hesitated, then whispered, "Because I've seen what happens when people get rewarded for cutting corners." Her eyes narrowed. "Personal experience?" I nodded. "Very." She didn't press further. But something in her expression told me she'd been waiting for someone brave enough to say it. My brother had no idea I'd been accepted into the program. I didn't tell my parents either. Instead, I let him believe he was still winning. When we ran into each other at a family dinner, he bragged, loudly, about his new clients. "They love me," he smirked. "They said I closed deals faster than anyone else." I smiled faintly and asked, "Do you ever worry about things catching up with you?" He laughed in my face. "That's the difference between us, Emily. You worry. I win." But for the first time, I didn't flinch, because I knew his wins weren't built to last. I didn't publish anything yet. Instead, I tested how shaky his foundation really was. I slipped one of Eric's anonymized documents, a suspicious transfer note, into a discussion thread in a private business forum. No names, just numbers. Within days, chatter started. Which firm is this? Who's moving money like this? Mark didn't know it was connected to him yet, but I watched his LinkedIn updates slow down, his posts less cocky, less frequent. A small crack. At the next family gathering, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Why are you smiling like that?" he demanded. I blinked innocently. "Like what?" "Like you know something," he snapped. I tilted my head. "Maybe I just stopped believing you." His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw him rattle. Just a flicker, but enough. Meanwhile, Caroline pushed me hard. She made me rehearse in empty boardrooms, refine every word, every slide. "Don't point fingers," she warned. "Expose the system. Let the guilty recognize themselves." That was the genius of it. I wasn't writing a takedown of Mark. I was writing about integrity, about how corruption rots from the inside, about how leaders who lie eventually collapse. And I knew that when Mark heard those words in that room, he'd feel the knife twist, because he'd see himself in every example. Before the real presentation, I had to pitch a draft to a small panel of program alumni. I was terrified. My voice shook at first, palms sweaty, but then I looked at the faces in front of me, professionals, leaders, people who'd fought their way up without cheating. I spoke with everything in me, the betrayal, the humiliation, the nights I cried, the promise I made to myself not to stay broken. When I finished, silence hung heavy. Then one woman whispered, "That was raw, real. You'll shake the room." I left that day with my first taste of confidence, but the small wins didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Eric called me in a hushed voice. "Emily, your brother's asking questions. He knows someone's watching his accounts." My chest tightened. "Does he know it's me?" "Not yet," Eric said. "But he's paranoid. And paranoid people make mistakes." I hung up, heart racing, because paranoia was exactly what I wanted. A week later, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. He leaned in the doorway, eyes dark, voice low. "I don't know what game you're playing," he hissed. "But remember this, you'll never beat me." I forced a smile, though my pulse thundered, because what he didn't realize was that the game had already started. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing to survive. I was playing to win. The night before the presentation, I barely slept. I paced my apartment, whispering my lines into the dark, imagining Mark's face when he realized every word was meant for him, even if I never said his name. By dawn, I wasn't tired. I was steady. The boardroom was massive, with glass walls overlooking the city. Rows of executives, department heads, and my peers filled the seats. At the front, the CEO himself sat in the middle, calm, watching. I clutched my notes. My throat was dry. But when Caroline squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Remember, you've already lived the hardest part," something in me unlocked. I walked to the podium. "Integrity," I began, voice low but clear, "isn't a word companies can just print in brochures. It's proven in the choices leaders make when no one's watching." A murmur rippled. I pressed on. "I've seen what happens when shortcuts are rewarded, when ambition is twisted into entitlement, when someone believes their wins will never be questioned." I paused, looked at the faces, and in the back of the room, my brother, Mark. He hadn't been invited, but of course he forced his way in. Arms crossed, smirk fading with every word. I advanced the slides. Anonymous case studies, data patterns, real numbers, pulled from Eric's careful digging, blurred just enough to avoid names, but sharp enough that anyone who knew the truth would feel exposed. "Here's the danger," I said, pointing to a chart. "One fraudulent transfer looks like a mistake. 10 looks like a pattern. And patterns destroy legacies." I didn't look at Mark, but I felt the heat of his glare. The CEO leaned forward, chin resting on his hand. His eyes didn't leave me. When I finished, silence filled the room, heavy, breathless. Then, applause. Slow, then rising, filling the space until it drowned out everything else. I exhaled, my knees nearly buckling. The CEO stood. "Emily," he said, voice resonant. "That was one of the most honest, courageous presentations I've heard in years. This company needs voices like yours." And then, he extended his hand. I stepped forward, shaking it, my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear. Behind me, a chair screeched. Mark had stood up, face pale. "This is garbage," he shouted, voice cracking. "She's making me look like a criminal." The room stilled. Executives turned. Eyes narrowed. I hadn't said his name. But his panic said it for me. The CEO's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "why do you think this applies to you?" Mark froze, color draining from his face. He stammered, I didn't. She's lying." But it was too late. His reaction was the confession, the COO whispered to the CEO. A few heads nodded. Someone scribbled notes. Mark's voice rose, desperate now. "She's jealous. She's always been jealous." I turned, finally meeting his eyes. My voice was steady. "Mark, integrity isn't jealous. It's just louder than lies." The room erupted, not in laughter, not in pity, but in the unmistakable hum of realization. The tide had turned. Security approached quietly. Not rough, not loud, just firm. "Sir, you need to leave," one said. Mark shoved back his chair, face red, fists clenched. "This isn't over," he spat. But as they escorted him out, every eye in the room saw him for what he was, a fraud unraveling. The CEO turned back to me, calm but serious. "Emily," he said, "stay after. We need to discuss opportunities." My breath caught. Because in the span of 20 minutes, I hadn't just survived, I'd won. And the fallout for my brother had only just begun. When the meeting adjourned, I felt the room shift around me. Executives avoided Mark's name, but his absence lingered like a shadow. The CEO called me into his office. He shut the door gently, his expression calm, but edged with steel. "Emily, what you did out there, it took courage. But it also exposed something we can't ignore." I swallowed hard. "I wasn't trying to—" He lifted a hand. "You didn't accuse anyone. That's the brilliance of it." The guilty revealed themselves. His eyes softened. "We'll investigate, quietly. But for now, consider yourself on the fast track." For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as Mark's little sister, not as a backup plan, but as Emily Carter. That night, my phone exploded with messages from Mom. "Emily, what did you do?" "Your brother is devastated." From Dad. "This family will fall apart if you keep pushing." And from Mark himself. "You think you've won? You've ruined everything. I'll make sure you regret this." My hands trembled, but not from fear. From clarity. They weren't protecting him out of love. They were protecting him out of habit. And habits can break. Within days, word spread across the company. Not official yet, but whispered in hallways, shared over coffee. Mark was suspended pending investigation. Caroline slid into my office with a grin. You should see the look on his old team's faces. Half are relieved. The other half are panicking, I whispered. He always thought he was untouchable. She smirked. And you just proved no one is. Sunday dinner used to be sacred in the Carter family. But when I arrived that week, the air was thick with tension. Mom sat stiffly, arms crossed. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. Mark wasn't there. Finally, Mom snapped, "You humiliated him in front of everyone." I set my fork down, calm. "I didn't say his name. He did that himself." Dad's voice was low, almost trembling. "He's your brother. Blood is supposed to protect blood." I leaned forward. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. Blood doesn't erase fraud." The silence was deafening. For once, they had no defense. I left early. Their disappointment heavy, but lighter on my shoulders than ever before. The following week, Mark showed up outside my building. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He grabbed my arm, voice hoarse. "You destroyed me, Emily. Everything I worked for, gone." I pulled free. My voice was steady. No, Mark, you destroyed yourself. I just held up the mirror. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You always wanted me to fail, I whispered. No, I just wanted to stop failing myself. He staggered back, stunned, as if he hadn't expected me to be stronger than his words. By month's end, the board announced Mark's resignation. To focus on personal matters, the statement read. Everyone knew the truth. His allies scattered. Friends stopped calling. Even Mom's voice on the phone cracked when she said, Your brother doesn't leave his apartment anymore. A pang of guilt tugged at me. But I reminded myself, guilt is not the same as responsibility. One evening, Caroline and I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. She raised her glass. To finally breathe free. I clinked mine against hers. To never be erased again. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a place I had to chase. It felt like a place I had earned. But as the night settled, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. This isn't over. He still knows something about you. I froze, the glass slipping slightly in my hand. Because if Mark was finished, who was keeping the war alive? The text haunted me for days. He still knows something about you. At first I panicked. What could Mark possibly hold over me? Secrets from college? Old mistakes? My mind spun in circles, but then I realized something. Fear was his last weapon. He had lost his title, his power, his respect. All he had left were threats, and threats only work if you let them. I decided to end it on my terms. I knocked on his apartment door. He opened it slowly, looking more like a ghost than the brother I once knew. Emily, he muttered. You shouldn't be here. I stepped inside anyway. I got your message. His eyes flickered. You think you've won, but you're not as perfect as you act. I took a breath, steady. You're right. I'm not perfect. I've failed. I've doubted myself. But the difference is, I own my flaws. You bury yours until they rot you from the inside. He didn't answer. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked small. I walked out without another word, and the door closed softly behind me. That was the last time I saw him. In the weeks that followed, the company promoted me to project lead. My name, my work, was finally recognized. People didn't see me as Mark's sister anymore. They saw me as Emily Carter, someone who fought to be heard. At home, things were different too. Mom still clung to the idea that family loyalty means silence. But Dad started calling me quietly, almost proudly. I watched the news, he said one night. You handled yourself with grace. You remind me of your grandmother. She never let men talk over her either. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was progress. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. But sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood. It's who stands beside you when the world doubts you. I learned that silence protects no one. That loyalty without accountability is poison. And that revenge, at its core, isn't about destroying others. It's about reclaiming the voice they tried to take from you. And I reclaimed mine. If you're still listening, thank you for hearing my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but maybe you've been there too. Undervalued, underestimated, betrayed by the people closest to you. Let me ask you this. Would you forgive betrayal like this? Or would you walk away forever? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Because stories like this, they're not just mine. They're ours.